A child's giggle echoes through the crisp forest air. Then, nothing. June 15, 2016. Half Moon Campground, Crazy Mountains, Custer Gallatin National Forest, Montana. A 3-year-old girl named Lila Thorne chases butterflies near her family's picnic spot, encircled by ancient pines and the distant roar of a cascading waterfall. 3 adults stay close by, chatting idly. The sky shines blue, sun filtering through leaves in golden patches. And then, in the blink of an eye, she's vanished. No cry, no rustle, no sign of distress, just gone. What ensues is one of Montana's most extensive search missions in history. Dozens of rangers, scent hounds, aerial drones, underwater specialists scour every trail, every thicket, every forgotten mining relic. They uncover zilch. No tiny shoe prints, no shredded dress, no remains. Almost 10 years on, Lila Thorne remains missing. No charges filed, no clues emerged. Authorities suspect this wasn't a mishap. So what truly unfolded in those woods? Before we dive deeper, where are you tuning in from? Share your spot in the comments. To grasp how a little one can evaporate without a whisper, you must first comprehend the locale. Sweetgrass County, Montana, lies in the south-central part of the state, with the Crazy Mountains rising dramatically to the north. It's a realm shaped by untamed wilds, jagged peaks, lush woodlands, and streams that slice through canyons like threads in fabric. Folks are few and far between. Hamlets are tiny, separated by stretches of pure wilderness. This isn't somewhere you end up by chance. You venture here deliberately, to hike, to fish, to flee the bustle of city existence. It's stunning, sure, but merciless too. Half Moon Campground nestles at the end of Big Timber Canyon Road in the Custer Gallatin National Forest, about 12 miles along a winding gravel path from the town of Big Timber. The campground is raw and primitive. No running water, limited or no cell service, no ranger station nearby, just a handful of sites carved into the forest, rock-lined fire pits, and the perpetual murmur of Big Timber Creek tumbling nearby, with falls visible on a short hike. The creek deceives with its charm. It appears gentle in spots, almost playful, but the flow is fierce in places, nourished by mountain snowmelt. The water's frigid, even in June. Below the ripples, boulders lurk, and depths plunge abruptly. Encircling the area are impenetrable groves, ponderosa pines, Douglas firs, and tangles of brush so thick you lose sight after a step or two. The ground's irregular, roots snake like snares, down trunks bar ways. Stray too far, and you'll hit steep slopes, ravines, and remnants of old mining claims from Montana's gold and silver eras. It's a terrain where orientation slips away fast, where echoes bounce oddly off bark, where the woods can engulf you if you're lax. And it was in this secluded nook of Montana that the Thorne clan opted for a day trip in June 2016. The outing was meant to be casual. Nothing fancy. Just a break to soak in fresh air, perhaps show little Lila how to toss pebbles into the creek. Her folks, Sarah Hale and Marcus Thorne, loaded their SUV and drove from Billings, roughly 3 hours west. They had company. With them was Lila's aunt, Evelyn Hale, Sarah's sister in her late 50s, who relied on a cane after a hip surgery. Also tagging along was a neighbor named Theo Lang, who'd offered to assist with Evelyn during the excursion. So 3 grown-ups in all, 1 mobility-challenged, 1 preschooler, and a remote spot. On the surface, it looked doable, secure even, but the wilds ignore agendas. The picnic spot they picked sloped gently, mere yards from the creek. A wooden bench flanked the fire pit, folding seats were set up, baskets brimmed with sandwiches and juice. The breeze carried hints of resin and earth. It was serene, the sort of hush that lets you overlook your isolation from aid. Out here, trouble means self-reliance. The nearest town, Udaho, Timber, has a small population. The ranger resources are limited, rescue gear's scarce. And the landscape? It punishes errors. This context is crucial, because when Lila Thorne went missing, she didn't fade from a bustling plaza with surveillance and crowds. She faded from a spot where the wild holds sway, where a kid's laugh drowns in gusts and gurgles, where tracks vanish into moss and leaves. A spot where concealing something, or someone, offers infinite choices. And if not deliberate, if this was pure oversight in a harsh setting, then the wild itself turns culprit. But here's what chills about this tale. Despite the remoteness, the perilous ground, the babbling brook and tangled trees, Lila didn't merely stray and lose her way. Because if so, rescuers would have spotted something. A ribbon from her hair, a scrap of her floral dress, a path for the hounds. But no. And that's when this shifts from sorrowful mishap to something darker. For in the ensuing hours and weeks, probes revealed mismatches, flip-flops, and actions that jarred. They'd suspect Lila's gravest threat that day wasn't the stream, the woods, or beasts. It was those meant to guard her. June 15th, 2016, Wednesday noon. The sun climbs high, warming the chill from the shade. The picnic site's alive in that lazy outdoor way. Tea steeps in a thermos. A small fire crackles for marshmallows. Lila Thorne, with her curly auburn locks and hazel eyes, buzzes with vim as tots do. She's in a pink floral dress and rubber boots, the pint-sized kind that charm adults. She's thrilled. At 3, all's a quest. Twigs turn wands, stones gems. The world's vast, novel, ripe for discovery. Per early tales from her parents, Lila played by the picnic that afternoon. The adults hovered near, some seated, some milling, some unpacking snacks. Her Aunt Evelyn rested on a blanket, her cane propped up owing to her recovery. Theo Lang, the neighbor, lingered close too. Sarah Hale, Lila's mom, later shared with rangers that she and Marcus chose to stroll to the creek for a quick dip of toes. It was close, perhaps 40 yards. They figured Lila stayed watched by Evelyn and Theo. But here's the fracture point. Upon Sarah and Marcus's return moments later, they said Lila was absent. Not peeking from a bush, not digging soil, not ambling, just unseen, gone. Alarm hit hard. They yelled her name, scanned nearby, peered into the creek, checked the SUV and bags. Nada. Around 1:45 p.m., a distress call went out. The caller sounded frantic, pleading, a kid lost, help urgent. Sweetgrass County Dispatch broadcast the alert, and soon initial responders rolled in. Rangers, volunteer rescuers, locals versed in the area. But accessing Half Moon Campground isn't swift. Recall, it's miles on rugged gravel at the end of Big Timber Canyon. Limited bars, no shortcuts. Teams navigated twisty tracks to arrive. By organized hunt's start, time had ticked, and in such wilds, minutes count. The first hunt zeroed on probable paths. Lila toddled to the creek and tumbled in, or veered into woods and disoriented. Both viable, both harrowing. Helpers fanned out, hollering her name, probing under boulders and logs. They splashed into the creek, groping bottoms, dreading the worst. Scent hounds arrived, pros that latch onto trails for leagues. They sniffed Lila's blanket, then loosed. But the dogs faltered. They looped. They nosed but didn't pursue away. That flagged first. For if Lila roamed solo, dogs should have trailed. Tots scatter scent galore on turf, plants, breeze. It's why hounds shine here. But zilch. As if Lila dissolved. As dusk neared that initial day, efforts ramped. More helpers came. Montana Wildland Rescue mobilized. Copters with infrared buzzed overhead, hunting heat blips. Kneel. Night dropped, chill piercing. Mountain temps plummet post-sunset, worse by water. If Lila exposed alone, clock raced. Searchers pressed through dark with beams and lamps, inching terrain. They inspected crevices, nooks, spots a wee one might huddle for heat. Still zilch. By dawn, the op ballooned to Montana's biggest in memory. Feds alerted. Sonar teams probed creek depths and pools. Corpse-sniffing dogs joined, somber necessity. Woods sectioned into grids. Every bit trod, logged, retrod. Yet day by day, outcome identical. No garb, no prints, no tussle marks, no form. It mocked reason. A 3-year-old in a vivid pink dress and boots doesn't poof in daylight with 3 adults yards off. Not sans trace, not in land, though tough. Combed by experts and hounds. Thus, probes turned tougher. What precisely occurred that noon? Who eyed Lila last? When? Where? And timelines crumbled. Sarah said she and Marcus hit the creek, leaving Lila with Aunt. But Evelyn thought Lila tagged with parents. Theo's tale mismatched both. Accounts clashed, pressed for specs, times, spots, postures, replies morphed. Marcus claimed brief absence. But how brief? 5, 10, 15, Sarah said Lila near the bench. But where? By fire, SUV side, creek edge. Queries muddied the view more. Then the call tape, public now, shows dread, haste. But some, including probes, heard vagueness, rehearsal vibes, perhaps shock, panic, or else. Soon, probe tone pivoted. No mere rescue. Criminal probe brood. What hour is it your way? Comment below. When a tot vanishes in wilds, response surges. All assets deploy. Seconds vital. Stats grim. First day key. After. Odds. Tank. So Lila Thorne's vanishing sparked full force. Within day 2, hunt swelled to 150-plus volunteers, locals, trekkers, off-duty badges, strangers touched by a lost girl's plight. They trekked hours on dusty paths to aid. Custer Gallatin Rangers led, but terrain overwhelmed. Backup called. Montana Wildland Unit brought gear, sat maps, radios, altitude-trained squads. Area gridded, teams assigned zones, walked twice, thrice. Hounds waved in, bloodhounds for long hauls, shepherds for air sense. Dogs got Lila's items, released at spot, expected outward trail to woods or water. But dogs odd, sniffed picnic, circled, retried, no outward lock, as if scent halted. Handlers reran with varied dogs. Starts? Same. One expert called it baffling, tots trail scents thick. Helos scanned canopy low. Infrared caught wildlife heat, deer, foxes, but no child. Sonar teams hit creek, pools, cold, cloudy, swift, probed logs, formations, nil. Attention to old mining relics. Area's history left shafts. Risky, deep. Teams explored accessible ones, lamps probing for falls, dirt stirs, cloth bits, nada. Days on, hunt widened, deeper woods, toddler unlikely spots, animal carry, farther wander. But coverage baffled more. Lila didn't just miss, erased sans trace. No prints in mud, no snags on thorns, no bent brush, no scent, no heat, no bones. Plucked clean. Town rallied heart-wrench, shops gave supplies, homes hosted helpers. Lila's flyers everywhere. Curly girl, hazel eyes, pink dress, boots, smiling, prayers, vigils, hope clung. But week 1 to 2, hope frayed. Conditions ideal, clear, no rain erasing, no snow hiding, land navigable, yet with all, tech pros nil. Probes pondered unsaid. Maybe Lila never strayed, never left spot, someone knows not telling. Ranger Chief Dana Morrow pressed conference day 8, measured words but hint clear, hunt ongoing, no quit but criminal probe now, chill scent, no lost belief, foul play suspected, focus from woods to picnic folk. Hunt lingered. Weeks, months. Helpers returned, stubborn. Areas rescanned, missed hopes. Wilds yielded naught. No closure, no Lila. Hush heavy wrong. Nature buzzes always. Gusts, gurgles, chirps, hums. Post Lila, muted, woods breath held. Somewhere, in depths, minds, those present, truth hid, awaiting. The first 48 hours after Lila Thorne vanished were a frenzy of hope and desperation. When a child disappears in the wilderness, time is the enemy. Every minute that passes narrows the window of survival. Hypothermia sets in fast in the crazy mountains, even in June. Nights drop into the 30s. A 3-year-old in a light dress and rubber boots wouldn't last long exposed to the elements, so the response was immediate and massive. Sweetgrass County doesn't have a large sheriff's department, but the moment the 911 call came in from a borrowed satellite phone at around 1:45 p.m., every available resource was mobilized. Deputies from Big Timber raced up the canyon road. Forest Service rangers, stationed in the Custer Gallatin National Forest, dropped everything and headed to Half Moon Campground. Local volunteers who knew the terrain better than anyone grabbed their packs and drove in, but getting there took time. The last stretch of Big Timber Canyon Road is narrow, washboard gravel that twists alongside the creek. In places it's barely wide enough for 2 vehicles. Cell service is spotty at best, non-existent deeper in. By the time the first official responders arrived on scene, nearly 2 hours had already slipped away. The initial search focused on the 2 most obvious and terrifying possibilities. Lila had wandered down to Big Timber Creek and fallen in, or she had toddled into the dense forest and become disoriented. Both scenarios had happened before in the crazy mountains. Both were nightmares no parent wants to imagine. Searchers formed hasty lines and swept the area around the picnic site. They called her name until their voices grew hoarse. They checked behind. Every log, under every clump of brush, inside the Thorne family SUV, even in the coolers and storage bins. Nothing. They moved to the creek. Big Timber Creek runs fast and clear in June, swollen with snowmelt from the high peaks. In places it looks harmless, shallow enough for a child to wade. In others it drops into deep pools or races over slick boulders. Volunteers waded in, feeling along the bottom with their hands and feet. They checked eddies and log jams downstream. Divers were called in from Bozeman, but it would take hours for them to arrive with proper gear. Then came the dogs. Search and rescue teams brought in trailing bloodhounds and air-scenting German shepherds, some of the best in the state. Handlers presented the dogs with Lila's blanket and a small jacket she'd worn earlier that day. The animals were walked around the picnic site, given the command to find. What happened next baffled everyone. The dogs sniffed intently around the immediate area, the fire pit, the bench, the blanket where Evelyn had been resting. They circled, they backtracked, they sniffed again. But none of them picked up a trail leading away from the site. No dog locked onto a direction and followed it into the trees or toward the creek. They simply couldn't find a scent path. Handlers tried multiple dogs. They tried different starting points. They tried letting the dogs cast wider. Same result every time. The scent appeared to stop right there at the campsite, as if Lila had been lifted straight up into the sky. One experienced handler later told investigators it was the strangest behavior he'd ever seen with tracking dogs. Toddlers, he said, are scent factories. They touch everything. They drip sweat and skin cells. They leave trails that linger for days. In ideal conditions like these, dry ground, mild temperatures, no rain to wash evidence away, the dogs should have had no trouble. But they didn't. As the afternoon bled into evening, helicopters joined the effort. A Montana Highway Patrol chopper and a private medevac bird equipped with forward-looking infrared, FLIR cameras flew grid patterns over the canyon. The thermal imaging could detect body heat through thick canopy. It routinely picks up lost hikers, injured animals, even poachers at night. They flew until fuel ran low. They refueled and flew again. They spotted elk bedded down in meadows. They picked up deer moving along ridgelines. They found a black bear with 2 cubs a mile up the slope, but no small heat signature that could have been a child. Night fell hard in the mountains. Temperatures plummeted. Searchers worked under headlamps and floodlights, moving slowly to avoid injury on the uneven ground. They knew that if Lila was out there alone, the cold was now the biggest threat. A 3-year-old doesn't have the body mass to retain heat for long. Hypothermia could set in within hours. By morning, the operation had grown into one of the largest searches Sweetgrass County had ever coordinated. Word spread fast in Montana's tight outdoor community. Volunteers poured in from Livingston, Bozeman, Billings. Off-duty law enforcement, experienced backcountry hunters, members of search and rescue teams from across the state. Some drove through the night to help. More than 150 people were on the ground by day 2. The forest was divided into grids. Each team was assigned a section to cover thoroughly, twice if possible. Every grid was walked, documented, walked again. Cadaver dogs arrived, grim but necessary. These dogs are trained to detect the scent of human remains, even underwater or buried. They worked the creek banks, the ravines, the thickets. Nothing. Sonar teams scanned deeper pools and bends in the creek where a small body might have lodged. They found old fishing lures, rusted cans, a lost kayak paddle from years past. No child. Attention turned to the surrounding terrain. The crazy mountains have a long mining history. Old prospector digs and abandoned shafts dot the landscape, some marked on maps, many not. A curious toddler could easily stumble into one. Teams checked every known opening. Where shafts were accessible, searchers rappelled in with ropes and lights, calling out, looking for any sign of disturbance. Again, nothing. Days turned into a week. The search pushed farther out, into areas no 3-year-old could realistically reach on foot. Could a mountain lion or bear have carried her off? It's rare, but not impossible. Searchers looked for drag marks, blood, torn clothing. They found wildlife sign everywhere, scat, tracks, scratched trees, but nothing that suggested a predator had taken a child. The more ground they covered, the more impossible it seemed. Lila hadn't just gotten lost. She had vanished in a way that left no trace at all. No footprints in the soft soil near the creek, no broken branches at toddler height, no snagged fabric on thorns, no scent trail, no heat signature, no remains. It was as if she had been erased. The community response was overwhelming and heartbreaking. Big timber businesses donated food and fuel. Churches organized prayer vigils. Locals opened their homes to out-of-state volunteers. Flyers with Lila's photo went up in every store window, every gas station, every cafe from Harlowton to Bozeman. Her face was everywhere. Curly auburn hair, bright hazel eyes, that pink floral dress and little rubber boots, smiling like she didn't have a care in the world. People who had never met the Thorne family drove hours to join the search lines. They walked until their feet blistered. They refused to give up. Hope clung on stubbornly, even as the days piled up. But hope began to fray. The weather had been almost perfect for searching, clear skies, no rain to destroy evidence, no snow to cover tracks, visibility excellent, terrain challenging but not insurmountable. And still, with hundreds of trained eyes, advanced technology, and some of the best tracking dogs in the region, nothing. Quietly, behind the scenes, investigators started asking questions no one wanted to ask. What if Lila hadn't wandered off at all? What if she had never left the picnic site? What if someone there that day knew exactly what had happened to her? About 8 days in, Ranger Chief Dana Morrow stood before a cluster of reporters at the command post set up near the campground entrance. Cameras flashed, microphones crowded forward. Morrow's face was drawn with exhaustion. He said the search would continue. They weren't giving up. But then he added words that changed everything. We are now treating this as a criminal investigation. The shift was unmistakable. This was no longer solely a rescue operation. It wasn't even primarily a recovery mission anymore. It was a potential crime scene, and the focus was turning from the vast, indifferent wilderness to the small circle of people who had been at Half Moon Campground on June 15, 2016. The forest kept searching long after the official effort scaled back. Volunteers returned on weekends. Locals hiked familiar trails with Lila's photo in their pockets. Some refused to believe she was gone for good, but the mountains gave up nothing. No answers, no closure, just the sound of wind in the pines and water over stone. And somewhere, whether deep in those woods or locked inside the memory of someone who was there that day, the truth stayed hidden. When a missing child case pivots from rescue to criminal investigation, the atmosphere changes overnight. Hope, already fragile, starts to feel like denial. The people who were once seen as grieving parents become persons of interest. Every word they've ever said gets dissected, every gesture replayed. That pivot happened quietly at first in the Lila Thorne case, then all at once. Investigators had always interviewed the family, that's standard, but in the early days those interviews were gentle, supportive, focused on gathering details to aid the search. Where exactly was Lila playing? Who saw her last? What direction might she have gone? By the second week, the tone had hardened. Sweetgrass County Sheriff's detectives, along with Montana Department of Justice agents who'd been brought in for expertise, began re-interviewing everyone who'd been at Half Moon Campground that day. They asked the same questions again, but this time with follow-ups, timelines, distances, exact positions, and the answers started to crack. Sarah Hale, Lila's mother, initially said she and Marcus had walked down to Big Timber Creek for just a few minutes, maybe 5 or 10, to look at the water and skip stones. They had left Lila playing near the picnic bench, assuming Evelyn and Theo were keeping an eye on her. Marcus Thorne's first version was similar. A short walk, quick glance at the creek, back in under 10 minutes. When they returned, Lila was gone. But when detectives pressed for precision, the stories shifted. Sarah later said it might have been closer to 15 minutes. Then she wasn't sure. Maybe longer. She'd lost track of time enjoying the view. Marcus, in a separate interview, said they'd actually driven the SUV a short distance down the campground road to check out another site they were considering moving to for better shade. Then he corrected himself. No, they walked. Then, maybe they did both, walked part way and drove part way. The distance mattered. 40 yards on foot is very different from driving out of sight. Evelyn Hale, the aunt, gave perhaps the most troubling account. Recovering from hip surgery, she'd been resting on a blanket with her cane nearby. She told investigators she thought Lila had gone with Sarah and Marcus to the creek. She hadn't realized the child had been left behind until the panic started. Theo Lang, the neighbor who'd come to help with Evelyn, said he'd been focused on making sure the older woman was comfortable. He assumed the parents had taken Lila with them. He hadn't been watching the child closely. So, in the crucial moments when Lila vanished, Sarah and Marcus thought Evelyn and Theo were watching her. Evelyn thought Lila was with her parents. Theo thought the parents had her, 4 adults. No one definitively watching a 3-year-old in a dangerous wilderness area. Investigators conducted multiple rounds of interviews. They separated the group. They asked the same questions in different ways, looking for consistency. They didn't find it. Sarah's description of where Lila had been playing changed. First near the fire pit, then closer to the SUV, then somewhere in between. Marcus couldn't pin down how long they'd been gone. Evelyn's memory of the sequence grew vaguer each time. Only Theo Lang's story stayed relatively steady, but it was the least helpful. He hadn't been paying attention to the child at all. Then came the emotional responses. Most parents of missing children are inconsolable. They search until they collapse. They beg the public for help. They can't eat, can't sleep, can't stop talking about their child. Sarah and Marcus did some of that. They joined search lines in the early days. They spoke to media, pleading for Lila's safe return. But investigators and some volunteers noticed things that felt off. During long interviews, Sarah and Marcus sometimes seemed more focused on defending their actions than on generating new leads. When pressed about timeline discrepancies, they grew defensive, irritated, at times almost angry. One detective later said privately that it felt like they were lawyering up in their heads before they'd even hired lawyers. To be clear, grief is messy. People react differently. Shock can make you flat. Guilt over a moment of inattention can make you defensive. Being questioned by law enforcement while your child is missing is hellish. But experienced investigators know patterns, and the patterns here were raising alarms. About 3 weeks in, both parents agreed to take polygraph examinations. Polygraphs aren't perfect, they're not admissible in court, but they're a tool, especially in missing persons cases where physical evidence is absent. Sarah and Marcus both failed theirs. Not on one question. On several key questions related to what happened to Lila and whether they knew her location. When confronted, Sarah said the stress and lack of sleep had affected the results. Marcus called the test unreliable. Neither offered to retake it under different conditions. The failed polygraphs weren't proof of guilt, but they were another red flag in a growing pile. Investigators brought in an outside expert, a retired FBI profiler with decades of experience in child abduction cases. After reviewing the interviews, timelines, polygraphs, and search results, the profiler delivered a blunt assessment. In his opinion, Lila had not wandered off. Something had happened to her at or near the picnic site, and the parents knew more than they were saying. That opinion leaked. Slowly at first, then all at once. Online forums exploded. True crime podcasts picked up the case. Local Facebook groups argued fiercely. Some defended the parents, saying they were being railroaded by overzealous cops. Others pointed to the inconsistencies and failed tests. The case became polarizing. Then came the development that silenced many defenders. Approximately 6 months after Lila disappeared, Child Protective Services removed the Thorne family's younger child, a baby brother born after the incident, from Sarah and Marcus's custody. CPS actions are confidential, details are sealed, but the very fact of removal spoke volumes. The state doesn't take children from parents without substantial cause, evidence of neglect, abuse, or imminent danger. Whatever CPS found, whatever concerns arose, it was serious enough to intervene. Sarah and Marcus fought the decision through the courts. They maintained their innocence, but the child remained in state care. Meanwhile, forensic teams returned to Half Moon Campground repeatedly. They used ground-penetrating radar to scan for soil disturbances. They brought in new cadaver dogs. They examined the Thorne SUV inch by inch for trace evidence: blood, hair, fibers. They found nothing conclusive. Phone records were pulled, no suspicious searches, no deleted messages that could be recovered, no calls to anyone unusual. It was infuriating for investigators. Every indicator pointed toward the parents knowing more. Inconsistent stories, failed polygraphs, defensive behavior, CPS action, expert opinion, but no physical evidence, no body, no confession, no smoking gun. Eventually, Sarah and Marcus stopped cooperating fully. They lawyered up. They declined further interviews. They retreated from public view. Without their active participation, the investigation stalled. But the suspicion never lifted, because the alternative explanations simply didn't hold up. If Lila had wandered into the creek, something would have been found downstream. If she'd gotten lost in the woods, the dogs would have tracked her. If an animal had taken her, there would have been signs: blood, drag marks, disturbed ground. None of those things existed. The only scenario that fit the total absence of evidence was that Lila never left the picnic area under her own power. That something happened right there, in the moments when no one was definitively watching her. And that someone present that day had covered it up. Investigators believed it. The retired profiler believed it. Much of the public, after the CPS revelation, believed it. But belief isn't evidence, and without evidence, no charges could be filed. So the case entered a painful limbo, open, active on paper, but cold in reality. Lila's photo stayed on missing children databases. Her age-progressed image circulated occasionally. But as months turned to years, the intense focus faded. Sarah and Marcus separated sometime around 2020. Reports vary on whether it was the strain of grief, the scrutiny, or both. They stopped speaking publicly. Evelyn Hale moved to assisted living. Her health declined. She gave no further interviews. Theo Lang returned to his quiet life in Billings. He passed a polygraph early on and was largely cleared of suspicion. And Half Moon Campground remained open to the public. Families continued to picnic there, campfires burned in the same rock rings, Big Timber Creek rushed past indifferent. But for those who knew the story, the place carried a different weight, a shadow in the sunshine, a question hanging in the mountain air. What really happened to Lila Thorne on June 15, 2016? And why has no one told the truth? By late 2017, the massive ground searches at Half Moon Campground had ended. The command post near the canyon road was dismantled. The flyers with Lila Thorne's smiling face began to fade and curl on telephone poles around Big Timber. The volunteers who had come from all over Montana slowly went home. The case didn't close. It just stopped moving. Officially, it remained open and active. Sweetgrass County Sheriff's Office and the Montana Department of Justice insisted they were still following leads. But everyone understood what that really meant. They would investigate any new tip, but without fresh evidence or a witness coming forward, there was nothing left to chase. The frustration inside the investigation was palpable. Detectives who had worked the case for over a year gave rare interviews where they spoke carefully about the weight they carried. One said he still drove up Big Timber Canyon sometimes, parked at Half Moon, and walked the site alone, hoping something would jump out that they'd missed. He never found it. Another admitted the case haunted him because every arrow pointed the same direction, toward the picnic site and the people there that day. Yet they couldn't prove it. No body, no physical evidence, no confession. "It's like trying to prosecute a ghost," he said. Sheriff Dana Morrow, who had led the early response, became the public face of the investigation. In press conferences through 2018 and 2019, he repeated the same measured lines. "The case is active, tips are still welcome, we have not given up." But his eyes told a different story. Exhaustion, resignation. The lack of evidence wasn't for lack of trying. Investigators returned to the campground multiple times with new technology. In 2018, they brought advanced ground-penetrating radar units borrowed from the university in Bozeman. Teams scanned every plausible area around the site for soil disturbances. Nothing. In 2019, they ran fresh cadaver dog teams, including one handler from Colorado with dogs trained on newer methods. The dogs alerted weekly in a couple of spots near the creek, but excavation turned up only animal remains. Every tip was followed. Every rumored sighting of a girl matching Lila's age-progressed description, whether in Wyoming, Oregon, or even Canada, was checked out. None panned out. The community felt the slow bleed of hope. Sweetgrass County is small. People know each other. The disappearance ripped open divisions that hadn't existed before. Some residents believed Sarah and Marcus were responsible and should have been charged long ago. Others felt the EDR. Parents had suffered enough that the scrutiny was cruel when no proof existed. Arguments flared in the local cafe, on hunting trips, at school events. Old friendships cooled. People stopped talking about it openly, but the tension lingered. Parents became more protective. Families who had camped at Half Moon for generations started choosing other spots. The campground itself never closed, but on summer weekends, it was noticeably quieter than before. Big timber businesses kept Lila's poster up for years, but by 2021 many had taken them down, not out of indifference, but because the constant reminder hurt too much. Sarah and Marcus's lives unraveled in slow motion. Their marriage, strained by grief and endless questioning, collapsed around 2020. They separated quietly. Sarah moved out of state for a time, seeking distance from the stares and whispers. Marcus stayed in Billings, working odd jobs, keeping to himself. Neither gave interviews after 2019. Their lawyers advised silence, and they followed it. Both continued to insist they had nothing to hide, but they no longer actively begged for public help. Evelyn Hale's health declined steadily. By 2022, she was in full-time care in Livingston. Visitors said she rarely spoke of Lila, as if the subject was too heavy to touch. Theo Lang went back to his routine. He had cooperated fully, passed his polygraph, and was never considered a serious suspect. He avoided media attention and quietly faded from the story. The younger sibling taken by CPS remained in state custody for several years. Details were sealed, but sources close to the case said the removal was tied to ongoing concerns about the home environment, not direct evidence of harm to Lila. Eventually, limited visitation was allowed, but the child did not return full-time. Legal reality set in hard. Prosecutors reviewed the file repeatedly. Each time they reached the same conclusion: not enough to charge. Circumstantial cases can be won, but this one was unusually thin. Inconsistent statements and failed polygraphs are powerful for suspicion, but weak in court. No physical evidence linking anyone to harm. No body to prove a crime even occurred. Without a major break, no district attorney would take it to trial. So the case sat in limbo. Parents suspected but not charged. A little girl missing but not declared dead. A family shattered yet unable to fully grieve or move on. Time kept marching. 2021 became 2022, then 2023. Lila's fourth birthday passed unmarked publicly, then her fifth, sixth, seventh. Each June 15th, local news ran a short update. 9 years since 3-year-old vanished in crazy mountains. The stories grew shorter, the photos older. National true crime shows covered the case once or twice, rehashing the same details, the same questions. Online communities kept discussion threads alive, debating theories, analyzing old interviews. But even those conversations slowed. By 2024, the intense public interest had largely burned out. New tragedies captured attention. The world moved on. But not everyone. A core group of locals still hiked the trails around Half Moon with Lila's picture in their minds. A few volunteers maintained a small Facebook page, posting age-progressed images every year. Investigators kept the file on their desks, not buried in a box. They all waited for the one thing that could change everything. A conscience that finally cracked, a deathbed confession, a new witness, a piece of evidence hidden for years. Sometimes those things happen. Cold cases break after decades, but sometimes they don't. And as 2025 drew to a close, the Lila Thorne case remained exactly where it had stalled almost a decade earlier. Suspended between hope and horror. Caught in the silence of the mountains, with no new answers and no sign that answers were coming. Half Moon Campground still welcomed campers each summer. The creek still rushed over rocks. The pines still whispered in the wind. To most visitors, it was just a beautiful, quiet spot in the crazy mountains. But for those who remembered June 15, 2016, it would always be something else. A place where a little girl in a pink dress and rubber boots laughed one moment and was gone the next. Forever. Some cases end with answers, a confession, a body recovered, charges filed, justice imperfect but delivered. Others don't. The Lila Thorne case is one of the others. Almost 10 years after that June day in 2016, the questions remain exactly where they were left. Unanswered, heavy, impossible to ignore for anyone who has ever looked closely. Where is Lila? That's the one that defines everything else. If something happened to her at the picnic site, whether accidental or intentional, where did her body end up? The area around Half Moon Campground was searched more thoroughly than almost any missing child case in Montana history. Hundreds of volunteers, multiple dog teams, helicopters, ground-penetrating radar, divers, excavations. They found nothing. So either the remains were hidden with a level of skill that defeated professional searchers using advanced tools, or they were moved far from the site in the narrow window before the 911 call. Or, the darkest possibility some still cling to, Lila never died at all. She was taken. But no ransom demand ever came, no credible sightings, no evidence of an outsider at the remote campground that day. The absence of a body isn't just a logistical puzzle. It's what keeps the case from moving forward legally and emotionally. Without remains, there's no definitive proof a crime occurred, no murder charge possible, no funeral for closure. Why did the stories change so much? Innocent mistakes happen. Memory is unreliable under stress. But the shifts in Sarah and Marcus's accounts went beyond fuzzy recollection. The length of time they were away from the site, whether they walked or drove, exactly where Lila was playing. These weren't minor details. They were the foundation of the entire timeline. And each time investigators circled back, the foundation shifted. Evelyn's belief that Lila had gone with her parents. Theo's admission he wasn't watching closely. 4 adults, 1 child, no overlapping consistent account of who was responsible for her in those critical minutes. If everyone was telling the truth as best they remembered, it points to a tragic breakdown in communication. A moment of collective inattention with catastrophic consequences. But if someone was shading the truth, it points to something far worse. Why didn't the dogs track her? This question still baffles search and rescue experts who worked the case. Tracking dogs don't need perfect conditions to work. They follow microscopic skin cells, crushed vegetation, disturbed air. Toddlers leave strong, fresh trails. Yet, every dog brought to Half Moon circled the picnic area and stopped. No trail leading away. No direction to follow. The only explanations that fit are chilling. Lila never left the site on her own. She was carried away quickly, minimizing ground disturbance. Or her scent was deliberately masked or removed, though no evidence of cleaning agents or other interference was found. What did Theo and Evelyn really see? Theo Lang passed his polygraph and was cleared early. His role seems peripheral, a helpful neighbor who wasn't focused on the child. But he was there, feet from where Lila was last seen. Did he notice anything odd in the parents' behavior when they returned? Did he hear anything before the panic started? Evelyn Hale's health issues made her memory unreliable, but she was Lila's aunt. She loved the child. If she suspected anything over the years, would she have said something before her health failed completely? We don't know. Neither has ever spoken publicly beyond. Initial statements. Why did CPS remove the younger sibling? This remains one of the most discussed aspects online. Child Protective Services acts on evidence, not suspicion. Whatever they uncovered, whatever risk assessment they made, it was serious enough to separate a baby from his parents for years. Was it directly tied to Lila's disappearance, prior neglect, something discovered during the intense scrutiny that followed? The records are sealed. We may never know the full reason. But the action sent a clear signal to investigators and the public. Authorities had concerns about the safety of children in that home. Will this case ever be solved? That's the question everyone wants answered. Investigators say they'll never close the file. New tips still trickle in occasionally. Advances in forensic technology, DNA techniques, ground imaging continue to improve. Sometimes cold cases break decades later. A deathbed confession, a new witness, conscience finally winning out. But as of the end of 2025, no such break has come. Sarah and Marcus remain uncharged. They live separate, quiet lives. Neither has spoken publicly in years. The crazy mountains keep their secrets. Big Timber Creek still rushes past Half Moon Campground year after year. Families still picnic there. Kids still chase butterflies in the meadows. Most have no idea what happened on a sunny June afternoon in 2016, but some do. And for them, the place will always feel different. A laugh in the mountain air. Then silence. Lila Thorne would be 13 years old now. She'd be in middle school, maybe playing soccer, learning to ride horses, growing tall like her mother. She never got the chance. Her face, age progressed by experts, still appears occasionally on missing children's sites. The curly auburn hair a little longer, the hazel eyes a little wiser. But it's a guess, a computer's imagination. The real Lila remains frozen at 3, in a pink floral dress, rubber boots, chasing butterflies. Gone. Cases like this force us to sit with uncomfortable truths. Not every mystery gets solved. Not every child comes home. Not every question gets an answer. And sometimes the people who know the truth choose silence forever, whether out of guilt, fear, or something we can't understand. The weight of the unsolved isn't carried only by investigators or the family. It's carried by the community that searched, by the volunteers who walked until they dropped, by anyone who has ever looked into the details and felt that pull in the chest. We want justice. We want closure. We want to believe the truth always surfaces eventually. But cases like Lila's remind us that sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes the wilderness wins. Sometimes silence wins. And all we can do is remember. Keep asking. Keep demanding answers, even when it feels pointless. Because Lila deserves that. Every missing child does. If you ever drive up Big Timber Canyon to Half Moon Campground, stop for a moment. Listen to the creek. Feel the wind in the pines. And think of a little girl who was there one moment and gone the next. Her story isn't over. It's just waiting. Waiting for someone, somewhere, to finally tell the truth. Until then, the questions echo through the mountains. Where is Lila Thorne? What really happened that day? And why has no one come forward? The forest stays quiet, but the questions never do.